Today I want to share with you some of the symbolism that I found delightsome in the Lindon Temple open house. I got to go recently, and what I saw shocked me and blew me away. Definitely one of my favorite temples. I will save a complaint for temples in general to the end of the video, but first let's dive into the symbolism, some ancient Hebrew practices that I noticed going on, and also the connection to Lord of the Rings and the elven kingdom of Lindon from the Second Age. Should be fun.
Blessed are your eyes, for they see.
First, a very quick note. All these symbols, of course, might mean different things to different people, and symbols can have multiple meanings, right? These are the symbols that I noticed, and I'm going to start with something that I didn't expect to see at a temple open house, and that really has deep significance for all of us as covenant makers, and that is a paper cup. Specifically, a cone-shaped paper cup where you get your water at this open house. This is a kind of cup that can't stand up on its own. You can't set it down, and that's the reason. I asked my wife, hey, do you realize what's going on here? Huh? And she's like, what's going on? I'm like, the cup, and I'm freaking out. I'm crashing out. And I'm like, why do they have this cup? Well, it's so you don't set it down and leave cups all over the grounds of the temple, right? You have to hold it. But what you don't realize, what you might not realize, is that this was an ancient temple practice dating back to at least the Temple of Herod. I'm hazy on if this was in the tabernacle or not. But if I remember right from Leviticus, and I'll do a video on Leviticus soon, I think this has been around. Well, in the ancient temple, you had something similar, a cone-shaped vessel called the Mizrach. The reason it was cone-shaped is because you weren't allowed to set it down. You were supposed to hold it sacred, to not drop it anywhere. That's rather important because you would fill this cup with blood. The ancient Israelite temple priest would slaughter the sacrifice, the lamb, the bull, the goat, and the blood would be collected in the Mizrach. And then it was carried to the altar. And of course, in ancient times, the right hand was the covenant hand. And so they would hold this cup in their right hand and then pray over it. But then they would anoint with their right hand as well. So they would switch the cup over to the left hand and then anoint. And you can see images of this on the Temple Institute. I'll try to link it below. Now, we know this from ancient Jewish sources describing the Passover sacrifice specifically. The priest stood in a line from the slaughtering area all the way to the altar, passing these cups from hand to hand. And the cups were rounded or conical so that they couldn't be placed on the ground. It was too sacred to set down. And you don't stop carrying this until you anoint the altar. And I know that's silly, but I did want to bring this up because the other thing I noticed all throughout this temple, the chandeliers, they all kind of had this similar shape up to the Mizrach. And so unbeknownst to all the visitors joining who were grabbing a drink of water, they were actually grabbing what looked like a paper version of an ancient priestly vessel. But look at some of these chandeliers. Inside the temple, they had large conical shaped chandeliers that hung down in the celestial room, the ceiling rooms, over the altars. Almost every room had something like this. And it might be accidental. Maybe they just picked a scheme and went with it. But when I look at that symbol, it does remind me of the blood collected from the sacrifice, the blood that atoned, that cleansed, that consecrated the altar and the tabernacle and the people of Israel. I specifically love the symbolic idea of this Mizrach, this cone, this vessel of consecrated blood or oil or whatever you want to call it, above the altar in the ceiling room. I really like that. Some more obvious and beautiful symbols on this temple, of course, the arch, which I made an entire video about the arch behind Jesus Christ in the church's logo and what the symbolic meanings of the arch might be. One thing I appreciated about this temple is it wasn't just an arch. In many of the windows at the top of the arch, they actually did have a full circle, which I think helps us realize that it is a circle and a square connected together in the symbol of the arch. Of course, it takes a compass and a square, the creation tools of eternity, to create both the heavens and the earth. We'll see that all over ancient symbolism, Masonic symbolism, as well as Latter-day Saint temple symbolism. And even before Joseph Smith was a Mason, I believe Don Bradley's research is that the symbols of the temple and of the compass and the square were engraven on the plates or on the box that held the gold plates, which is just awesome. These symbols remind us that Christ is the creator of the heavens and the earth, and also that the heavens and the earth meet in the temple. But I'll let you go watch that other video to see the 7 or 8 different symbols of the arch that I share. Symbol number 4 that is all over this one is, of course, flowers. And this is the most on-the-nose symbol for sure. The temple is surrounded by a garden. The windows are stained glass gardens. It's on the grounds, the carpets, the stained glass. It's on the ceilings. And it's not just decoration. It's doctrine to us that the temple is a garden. It's always been a garden. The ancient tabernacle was draped in fabric and embroidered with flowers and pomegranates. Solomon's temple was carved with lilies and palm trees. And that's because the temple is Eden, the garden where God dwells, where heaven and earth were once in the same place, where the primordial mound is, the axis mundi, the closest place between heaven and earth. This is all symbolic of Eden. When we were expelled from Eden, cherubim and a flaming sword stood at the entrance. And in the ancient tabernacle, you had the veil representing the separation between heaven and earth, the separation from the presence of God, and cherubim on that veil. As you pass through the veil into the Holy of Holies, or in our modern temples, as we pass through the veil into the celestial room, we are passing back into the presence of God. We are doing what was done in the Garden of Eden. We are through the veil, which represents Christ, passing through the cherubim, passing through sin and death, and into the presence of God. One thing I love is to see what number they choose to go with. And usually temples will have like a number, like a 7-leaf flower that's everywhere, and there's just 7 everywhere, or like things like that. In this temple, I didn't see much of that. There was 4s in some rooms and 5s and 7s and different, but there's one big flower in the middle of the room that reminded me of something when I toured another temple and they had a 5-leaf flower everywhere. And having the 5 petals of the flower, I don't know the biblical significance of the number 5. I don't think it's as concrete as some other numbers like 3 or 4 or these other ones. But what I do love about it is there are 5 covenants that we make in the temple. And so when I see that, as you're walking down the stairs and you see that beautiful flower on the floor, it just does remind me to think through those covenants. I thought I'd share. The number 2 is in ancient temple symbolism all over the place. But one of the things I always point to is Solomon's temple. Had 2 pillars named Jachin and Boaz, and they stood on either side of the entrance. And I also think, again, of cherubim, the 2 cherubim, who I believe represent sin and death that separate us from God. And I could be wrong about that, but that's my understanding. There are 2 of them on the Ark of the Covenant. There are 2 angels at the empty tomb of Christ. Personal belief, I do believe those are the cherubim. He conquered sin and death, so why wouldn't they be there? We have 2 witnesses in the scriptures. We have 2 is the number of covenants, of witnesses. We have 2 witnesses. Again, thinking of the cherubim, the 2 cherubim, and how they separate the veil between heaven and earth and how Christ overcomes that. I think a pretty cool, like I know we're taking down the angel Moroni's a lot. The next temple that has 2 spires, can we get 2 cherubim up on top? Because I think that'd be so awesome. And before I get to complaining and just some concerns I have, we'll start with Lindon as a Lord of the Rings location, because this is really fun for you Lord of the Rings nerds out there. Because Lindon, the city, was actually named after the linden tree, but they spelt it wrong. So instead of getting the linden tree, they got Lindon. And that's great because in Tolkien's world, Lindon was a place that the elves lived in the Second Age. It's where Galadriel dwells. It's where at the end of the movies, when they sail off into the Grey Havens at the end, and they're going to the Undying Lands. And this is symbolic of moving to the next phase, of diminishing, of perhaps going to heaven for elves, although that's a little different. But it's moving on from this Middle Earth to the Undying Lands. That's where Lindon is. This has deep significance to me. We sang the song Into the West, which is about this kind of move to the Undying Lands. Was sang that at my father's funeral. Like, I love this symbol. So when you think of going to the Lindon Temple, I want you to think of the white ship sailing off, crossing that judgment, crossing the bar, and moving into rest, into the Undying Lands. Permanent peace. I'm not saying Tolkien planned this, but I'm glad that they messed up on the name Lindon so that it aligns perfectly with Tolkien's lore as well. When you pass through the arch, the threshold, when you cross that bar, enter the temple, I hope that you feel that you are entering a vessel that carries you into the presence of God. That's good. All right. Last, just a concern I have. I do think that we are losing symbolic literacy in our culture. I do feel like it's sad because not only are symbols losing meaning when we could just teach them a little bit, just a little bit. Like if we all just knew circles and squares and a couple numbers and a few symbols, like we would get so much more out of the temple. But instead, what I feel like is happening is we're losing some of the ancient symbolism, and then now new temples, a lot of the decor and the architecture is just whatever looks pretty or whatever's functional. And maybe I'm totally wrong on this, but the change to just make all temples look like they're surrounding like beauty, it's like, great, okay, we've got the garden motif down, but we don't have the all-seeing eye. We don't have the covenant hands. We don't have the sun and moon and the stars. We don't have the sunstone of the Nauvoo temple or the angel on top or any of these symbols that are really near and dear to the restoration. I don't know. Maybe that's just me complaining, but my favorite temples are Salt Lake and Nauvoo and St. George and Manti, and it's not because their architecture is more beautiful. By today's standards, they're a little outdated. They're a little different. Logan's the exception. Logan is a stunning temple. But I think why I'm drawn to them is because they have symbols everywhere that were intentional, that were taught, that were passed down. And now when I go to my local temple in Saratoga Springs, I just see a lot of flowers. And I don't always know if there was an intended symbol at all, or if they just put flowers on the chairs and the ground and the ceiling and everywhere because it went well together and it fit the color scheme. I feel like I don't know. I'm a little sad about it. I'm a little salty. Maybe if they just taught us more what the architects were sharing, I wouldn't feel that way. But sometimes I do. I love the temple. I love symbolism. I love the symbols of the restoration, and I hope we can carry those on into future temples as well. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if I should do more videos like this, going through the symbolism of different temples, I would love to. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for watching, and I have an exciting announcement. I have a new kids show called Brother Sunbeam on YouTube, and soon to be YouTube for kids. In this show, it's going to be like Latter-day Saint singing time in a way that kids can understand and feel. We're being very true with doctrine, bold about doctrine, but think of it as a mix between maybe a Mr. Rogers, a Steve from Blue's Clues, maybe a Blippi. It shouldn't be too much dopamine overload, but the most important thing is that we are teaching doctrine to kids and just trying to provide a clean, happy, healthy Latter-day Saint source for media for young kids. So feel free to follow along over at Brother Sunbeam, and thank you so much for your support.